Steve Harvey saw a man desperately counting pennies to get on a bus. What happened next restored his faith in humanity. It was a cold January morning in 2018, and Steve Harvey was running late. Not fashionably late, not celebrity late, but genuinely, frustratingly late. His car had broken down 3 blocks from his hotel in downtown Chicago, and his phone was dead. He had a speaking engagement at a youth center across town in 45 minutes, and the only option left was public transportation. Steve Harvey, the man who'd hosted Family Feud, who'd performed for sold-out crowds, who'd built an empire on making people laugh, was standing at a city bus stop at 7:32 in the morning, wearing a gray peacoat and a winter hat pulled low over his famous mustache. The bus stop was crowded with the usual morning rush, nurses finishing night shifts, construction workers heading to job sites, students with heavy backpacks, and the everyday people who kept the city running while most of the world was still asleep. Steve stood near the back of the small shelter, watching his breath form clouds in the frigid air, checking his watch every 30 seconds. That's when he noticed the man. He was standing at the very edge of the bus stop, away from the shelter, as if he didn't quite belong with the waiting crowd. Mid-50s, maybe older, with a weathered face that told stories of hard years and harder choices. He wore a thin jacket that was nowhere near warm enough for a Chicago January, work boots that had seen better decades, and a knit cap with a hole near the top. But what caught Steve's attention wasn't what the man was wearing. The man had both hands cupped together, filled with coins, and he was counting them over and over. Pennies, nickels, dimes, a few quarters. His lips were moving silently as he sorted through them, with fingers that were red and chapped from the cold. Count, recount, separate, try again. There was a desperation in the way he handled those coins, like they held the answer to a question he was afraid to ask out loud. Steve watched as other people at the bus stop noticed the man too. A couple of them glanced at him and quickly looked away. One woman wrinkled her nose and took a step back. A teenage boy nudged his friend, and they both snickered. The bus rounded the corner, its brakes squealing as it approached the stop. The waiting crowd began to shift forward, getting ready to board. Steve reached into his pocket for his wallet, pulled out a $5 bill for his fare, and prepared to get on. But the man with the coins wasn't moving forward. He was counting faster now, his hands shaking, not from the cold this time, but from something else. Panic, maybe, or shame. As people began boarding the bus, dropping their fare into the machine with the casual ease of routine, Steve heard it. The man's voice, quiet and cracking. "Excuse me, does anyone have change? I need to make exact fare. I'm short about 35 cents. Nobody responded. People kept boarding, eyes down, pretending they hadn't heard. The man stepped closer to the bus door, his voice a little louder, a little more desperate. "Please, I just need change for these pennies. I've got the money. I just need someone to—" "Keep the line moving," someone shouted from inside the bus. The bus driver, a heavy-set woman in her 40s with tired eyes, looked at the man with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Sir, do you have exact fare or not? I can't hold up the whole route." The man's shoulders sagged. I've got $2.15. The fare is $2.50. I just need 35 cents. I've got pennies I can trade." "I can't make change," the driver said, not unkindly, but firmly. "Exact fare only. You know the rules." The man looked down at his handful of coins like they'd betrayed him. Behind him, the remaining passengers were getting impatient. Someone groaned. Another person murmured something about homeless people holding up the bus. Steve Harvey stood 3 people back in line, watching this scene unfold, and something inside him cracked open. He thought about all the times in his own life when he'd been short on money, when he was sleeping in his car, trying to make it as a comedian, and he'd counted out coins to buy a $1 menu hamburger. when he'd stood at a gas station hoping the $2.37 in his pocket would be enough to get him to the next gig, when he'd felt the weight of the world's judgment pressing down on him for being broke, for being desperate, for being less than what society demanded. He thought about the people who'd helped him during those times. The stranger who'd bought him a meal without being asked. The comedy club owner who'd let him sleep on the couch in the office. The woman at the shelter who'd looked at him like he was still a human being worth saving. And he thought about all the times since then when he'd had the chance to pay it forward and hadn't. All the times he'd walked past someone in need because he was too busy, too important, too far removed from those desperate days to remember what it felt like. Not today. Steve stepped out of line and walked up to the front, positioning himself right next to the man with the coins. "Excuse me," Steve said to the bus driver. "I got him." The driver looked up, squinting at Steve's face. Recognition flickered in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. The man with the coins turned to look at Steve, confused. "What?" "Your fare," Steve said, pulling out his wallet. "I got it." He handed a $5 bill to the driver. "2 fares, please. Whatever's left, keep it." The driver took the bill, processed the fares, and waved both of them onto the bus. The man just stood there, frozen, staring at Steve like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Come on," Steve said gently, putting his hand on the man's shoulder. "Bus is leaving." They boarded together and moved toward the back, where 2 seats were open side by side. Steve gestured for the man to take the window seat, then sat down next to him. The bus lurched forward, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The man was still clutching his coins, still processing what had just happened. His eyes were wet, but he was trying hard not to let the tears fall. "You didn't have to do that," the man finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Steve replied. "I had the money. I couldn't get anyone to give me change for my pennies. I tried at 3 different stores this morning. Nobody wanted to be bothered." Steve nodded, saying nothing, just listening. "I've been counting these coins since 5 a.m., the man continued, the words pouring out now like he'd been holding them in for too long. "I sleep in a shelter on Madison Street. They kick us out at 6, rain or shine, cold or not. I've got a job interview this morning, first one in 8 months, and it's all the way in Oak Park. If I miss this bus, I miss the next connection. And if I miss that, I miss the interview. And if I miss the interview—" His voice broke. "I can't miss this interview. It's just warehouse work, nothing special, but it's 40 hours a week, and they said if I can get there on time today, show them I'm serious, the job is mine. 40 hours a week means I can rent a room, means I don't have to sleep in the shelter anymore, means I can maybe finally call my daughter and tell her that her dad isn't a complete failure." Steve felt something tighten in his chest. "How long's it been," he asked, "since you talked to your daughter?" 3 years. The man wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She's 14 now. Stopped answering my calls when I lost the apartment. Can't blame her. What kind of father ends up homeless?" "The kind who's had some bad breaks," Steve said. "The kind who's still fighting." The man looked at Steve for the first time, really looked at him, and his eyes widened slightly. "Wait, you're Steve Harvey?" It wasn't a question. It was a quiet statement of disbelief. Steve nodded. "Yeah, I am." "Oh God." The man pulled back slightly, embarrassed. "I just told Steve Harvey my whole sad story. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Steve interrupted. "You've got nothing to be sorry for. I can't believe Steve Harvey just paid my bus fare." Steve smiled, but it was a sad smile. "You know what I can't believe? That I almost didn't. I almost just got on that bus and minded my own business. Almost let you stand there counting those coins while everyone else pretended not to see you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Can I tell you something? Something I don't talk about much." The man nodded, still looking stunned. Before I made it, before Family Feud and the Suits and all of this, I was homeless too. Lived in my 1976 Ford Tempo for 3 years. Showered at gas stations, did my laundry in rest stop bathrooms. And you know what the worst part was? The man shook his head. It wasn't sleeping in the car. It wasn't being broke. It was the way people looked at me, or didn't look at me. Like I was invisible. Like I was a problem to be avoided, instead of a person to be seen. Steve's voice was thick with emotion now. I stood at a lot of counters, counting coins, hoping I had enough. I got turned away from a lot of places, and every single time it chipped away a little more of my dignity, a little more of my hope, until one day I was ready to give up entirely. The bus hit a pothole, jostling them both. Outside, the city rolled past, buildings and people and life moving forward. "What stopped you?" the man asked. "From giving up?" "A woman named Ms. Johnson. She ran a soup kitchen where I used to eat. One night, after everyone else had left, she sat down across from me and said, 'I don't know your story, but I know you're not done yet. You've got something in you that the world needs to see. Don't you quit before you show us.'" Steve smiled at the memory. I didn't believe her at first, but she kept saying it. Every time I came in, "Don't quit before you show us." Like it was my personal mantra. And eventually, I started believing it too. Started believing that maybe my current circumstances didn't have to be my final destination. He turned to look at the man. "What's your name?" "Robert Patterson." "Well, Robert Patterson, I need you to hear me when I say this. That interview you're going to, that warehouse job, that's not your final destination either. That's just your next step. And every step counts, no matter how small." Robert's eyes were full-on streaming tears now. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just promise me you're going to walk into that interview with your head up. Not ashamed. Not apologetic. Like a man who's survived things that would have broken most people. Because that's what you are." Robert nodded, unable to speak. Steve reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Not his celebrity business card, but a plain white card with just a phone number on it. "This is a direct line to someone in my organization. You call this number after your interview, win or lose, and tell them Steve Harvey said to help you. We run a foundation that helps people get back on their feet. Job training, housing assistance, that kind of thing. You call them, you hear me?" Robert took the card with shaking hands. Why? Why are you doing this?" "Because somebody did it for me. And because 35 cents shouldn't be the thing that stands between a man and his second chance." The bus began to slow down. The automated voice announced the next stop. "This is my stop," Steve said, standing up. "You keep going, you get to that interview, and you knock it out of the park." As Steve moved toward the exit, Robert called out, "Mr. Harvey." Steve turned back. "What did Miss Johnson say, the woman from the soup kitchen?" Steve smiled. "Don't quit before you show us. Don't quit before you show us," Robert repeated, like he was memorizing a prayer. Steve stepped off the bus, and as it pulled away, he could see Robert through the window, still sitting in that back seat, still holding the business card, still crying. What Steve didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that a woman sitting 3 rows ahead of them had recognized him the moment he'd paid Robert's fare. She discreetly recorded the entire conversation on her phone, moved by what she was witnessing. That night, she posted it to Twitter with the caption, "Just watch Steve Harvey pay a homeless man's bus fare and change his life. This is what real success looks like." The video went viral within hours. By the next morning, it had been shared hundreds of thousands of times. News outlets picked it up. Celebrities retweeted it. But more importantly, regular people started sharing their own stories of being helped, of helping others, of the small acts of kindness that had changed their lives. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was happening away from social media. Robert Patterson made it to his interview that morning. He walked in at exactly 9:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, with his head held high. When the hiring manager asked him to tell them about himself, Robert told the truth. He told them about being homeless, about the shelter, about counting pennies at a bus stop. But he also told them about a stranger who'd seen him when he felt invisible, who'd reminded him that his current circumstances weren't his final destination. The hiring manager, a man named Tom Rodriguez, had been homeless himself once, 20 years earlier. He hired Robert on the spot. Robert called the number on Steve's card that afternoon. Within 2 weeks, Steve's foundation had helped him secure temporary housing. Within a month, they'd connected him with a therapist who helped him work through years of trauma and shame. Within 3 months, Robert had his first paycheck, his own apartment, and the courage to call his daughter. The conversation with his daughter didn't go perfectly. She was hurt, angry, confused. But she agreed to see him. One coffee meeting, that's all. One chance to prove he was serious about rebuilding their relationship. That one coffee meeting turned into weekly dinners. Those weekly dinners turned into her spending weekends at his apartment. And 8 months after Steve Harvey paid for a bus fare, Robert Patterson walked his daughter down the aisle at her middle school graduation, tears streaming down both their faces. Steve didn't know any of this at first. He'd done what he did at the bus stop and moved on, the way he'd helped dozens of people over the years. But 6 months after that January morning, he received a letter at his office. The letter was from Robert. In it, he detailed everything that had happened since the bus ride: the job, the apartment, the reconciliation with his daughter. But the part that made Steve break down crying was at the end. Robert wrote, "You told me that 35 cents shouldn't be the thing that stands between a man and his second chance. But it wasn't about the money, Mr. Harvey. It was about being seen. For 3 years, I walked through this city like a ghost. People looked through me, not at me. I started believing I deserved to be invisible. But you saw me. You sat next to me. You listened to my story like it mattered. And in doing that, you reminded me that I still mattered. That changed everything. Not the bus fare, the being seen. I've started volunteering at the shelter where I used to stay. And you know what I do? I sit with people. I listen to their stories. I see them. Because I learned from the best that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another human being is simply acknowledge their humanity. Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." Steve kept that letter in his desk drawer. He read it whenever he felt disconnected from what truly mattered, whenever the celebrity and the success and the noise got too loud. Because that January morning at the bus stop reminded him of a fundamental truth. We're all just a few bad breaks away from desperation. All of us. The only difference between the man counting pennies and the man paying the fare is timing, luck, and circumstance. And when we have the ability to help, when we have the 35 cents, the kind word, the moment of attention, we have a choice. We can look away, protect our comfort, maintain our distance. Or we can step forward, close the gap, and remind someone that they're still human, still valuable, still worth seeing. A year after that bus ride, Steve was giving a speech at a conference for young entrepreneurs. During the Q&A session, someone asked him what his greatest accomplishment was. Everyone expected him to talk about Family Feud, about his books, about his media empire. Instead, Steve pulled out his phone and showed them a photo. It was a picture Robert had sent him just that morning. Robert and his daughter, standing in front of his apartment building, both smiling, both whole. "This," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "this is my greatest accomplishment. Not because I gave a man $2.50 for bus fare, but because I chose to see him when everyone else chose to look away. Because I sat down next to him and listened to his story. Because I remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and decided I never wanted to make anyone else feel that way. He looked out at the audience of successful, ambitious, driven people. You're all going to make money. You're all going to achieve things, but I promise you, the thing you'll be most proud of won't be the zeros in your bank account. It'll be the moment you chose someone's dignity over your convenience. It'll be the time you saw someone everyone else was ignoring. It'll be the day you realize that your success means nothing if you don't use it to pull someone else up. The room was silent. Several people were crying. Robert Patterson taught me that, Steve continued. A homeless man at a bus stop reminded me why any of this matters. And now I'm asking you, I'm challenging you, to look for your Robert. To find the person everyone else is walking past, to be the one who stops, who sees, who helps. He paused, letting his words settle, because here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. We're all Robert sometimes. We're all counting pennies, hoping we have enough. We're all standing at bus stops, desperate for someone to see us. And the only way we survive this life, the only way we make it mean something, is by being there for each other, by paying the fare when someone comes up short, by sitting down next to someone everyone else is avoiding, by remembering that there but for the grace of God go we. The video of that speech, like the bus video before it, went viral. But more importantly, it started a movement. People began sharing stories of helping strangers, of being helped by strangers. The hashtag #PayTheFare trended worldwide, not as a literal request for money, but as a reminder to help when you can, however you can. Robert Patterson eventually left the warehouse job for something better. He became a counselor at the very shelter where he'd once slept, helping other people navigate the path from homelessness to stability. He told everyone who would listen about the man who paid his bus fare and changed his life. And Steve carried that business card, the one he'd given Robert, in his wallet for the rest of his life. Not Robert's card, but a replica of it. Just a plain white card with a phone number and 5 words written on the back in Steve's own handwriting. Don't quit before you show us. Because that cold January morning at a Chicago bus stop taught him something he'd forgotten in the climb to success. It's not about how much money you make or how famous you become or how many people know your name. It's about the moments when you choose to close the distance between yourself and someone who's struggling. When you choose to see someone everyone else is ignoring. When you choose humanity over convenience. 35 cents. That's all it took to change 2 lives. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. Connection, compassion, the simple act of acknowledging that someone else's struggle matters. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that small acts of kindness can create ripples we can't even imagine, then here's your challenge. Find the person who's counting pennies at the bus stop of life. Don't walk past them. Don't look away. Stop. See them. Help them. Because you never know when your 35 cents might be someone's second chance. And remember what Steve Harvey learned that January morning. Success isn't measured by what you achieve. It's measured by who you help along the way.